When I started early on as a practitioner, I used to think that health was a physical picture. And as I've gone along through my journey as a practitioner and through my life as a now 40 something woman, I have found that health has a much deeper understanding than just the physical body. If you've been along on this journey with me, you've heard that I've talked about holistic wellness not being an Amazon Prime kind of fix. And one of the deep steps that we need to take along this journey is taking a look at what we tell ourselves inside of our minds. Our inner critic, the ego mind that tells us a lot of stories and is the loudest voice in the conversation, has an incredible impact on our health and well being. Don't sleep on the inner critic. And join me this week as we take a look at just how powerful that little voice can be in our health and wellness picture.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Irizarry. I'm an Eastern medicine practitioner who is passionate about women's health and helping women live their best lives. My goal is to put you in the driver's seat of your health, offering period solutions for a symptom-free life. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are, I am happy you're here and welcome all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show.
Welcome back to another episode of the Reproductive Rebel podcast. I am coming out of doing an amazing show with another practitioner and wanted to talk and do a deeper dive into this idea of our inner critic. So when we are looking at our health picture, we don't give nearly enough credence to that little inner critic that lives inside of our head that tells us all kinds of things. So if you quiet your body and quiet your mind and you drop down into your body, what kinds of things do you hear laying there? Maybe you feeling like you can't sit still, like we talked about with Angela Castrino the other week. We were talking about a woman's worth and the fact that, she felt guilty about feeling idle, right? That feeling comes from a little voice inside of her head saying, you're not doing enough. You're not moving fast enough. You're not producing enough. That inner critic is actually one of the most detrimental parts of our health because we internalize a lot of things that really don't serve us. We internalize narratives like we're not productive enough, we're not doing enough, our house isn't clean enough. Like we see videos on Instagram and we think, man, that house is so clean compared to mine. And the thing is that you don't see is how much shit they might have pushed to the corners that don't appear in the frame. Their house could be a fucking dump and you would never know it because they're only showing you what they want you to see, right? But because of what we see and what is reinforced for us over and over and over again, because of all of these visuals that we have with these better home and garden, picture perfect kinds of pictures of homes and vacations and houses and how clean everything is and everything has its place. Like our houses are meant to be lived in, enjoyed. Like, do I like to have a clean, clutter-free house? Yeah, but does it stay that way very long? Not with kids, it doesn't. Not with dogs, it doesn't. Like, is it something I have to work to maintain? Yes, but I have had to learn to accept over the years that this idea of perfection that I was holding in my home was physically making me ill. It would cause me anxiety. I would be so stressed out about the fact that my house didn't look perfect. And that was causing me physical pain. It was disrupting my digestion. It was making my chest tight. None of those things are good for you. So even though I don't want to belabor this point for a really long period of time, I really thought that it would be important to do an episode about the inner critic because we feed ourselves a lot of bullshit. Sometimes we're conscious of it and sometimes we're not. Sometimes we just internalize certain themes like I need to be moving constantly. Like, I grew up in a household where my mom rarely sat down and watched a movie with us or watched TV with us. And I remember, like a picture in my mind, the moments that she did sit down with us. Why? Because she was always in the kitchen cooking or in the kitchen cleaning things, or she was running down to the other end of the house to grab a load of laundry and then she'd take it down to the basement and she'd bring the next one up. Like, my mom was always in motion. My grandmother was always in motion. I grew up surrounded by female figures in my family that subscribed to that Acadian French work ethic that you have to always be in motion, producing something, working hard. I internalized this idea of working hard being part of my self worth so deeply that I physically made myself sick in my 20s. And you know what really changed a lot of that for me? The birth of my daughter 13 years ago. She taught me that I had to surrender to my house being a mess because by the time she became a toddler, my house had toys everywhere. And that's normal. That's what a lived in house is supposed to look like. But man, didn't that stress me out. And to the point where her little 18-month-old self, I would be like, it's time to pick up. And she knew she had to run around and pick up her toys and put it in the little laundry basket that was underneath the coffee table in the living room because mom was more relaxed when there wasn't toys everywhere. Right. But I say all of this because I was holding myself to this unhealthy level of perfection. My house had to look perfect. Everything had to be clean and picked up. Now, as a person who easily gets overstimulated, if you're familiar at all with human design, I'm a 6'2". So I am a hermit. I like my space to be clean and quiet. And, I get overstimulated easily. So having clutter around does generate a level of anxiety for me just because of who I am. But I had to learn to surrender a lot to this idea of perfection that I was holding in my head around what everything was supposed to look like, how I was supposed to look. Like, I remember going into when I used to work in a W-2 job, I remember going into work and I had a woman one day who stopped me and she goes, "How do you do it?" And I was like, "What do you mean? How do I do it?" And she goes, "You come in here every day. Your makeup is perfect. Your hair is perfect. I know you have 3 small children at home. I don't know how you do it." And that really stuck with me because I've thought about that all day. And as I was eating my lunch and thinking about what she had said to me first thing in the morning, I realized how much I stressed myself out in the morning to look that way, to walk into work looking like I had my shit together because I truly believed that I had to deliver that level of appearance for people to take me seriously. And when we think about this inner critic, our inner critic gets shaped by society. It gets shaped by life experience. It gets shaped by cultural expectations. I remember when my husband and I got married, my husband is Spanish and he's Puerto Rican. Let me be specific. He is Puerto Rican. And when we got married, I had another Latina female say to me that in order to survive in a happy marriage, I needed to make sure that when he got home at the end of the day, I had my makeup done, my hair is done. It doesn't matter what I looked like as a scrub during the day. Like, I needed to be put together by the time he got home that made a really big impression on me because I already was a person that didn't like to have a hair out of place, right? I didn't like to not look like I was perfect and like I had all my shit together, right? I never wanted to show that level of weakness to anybody. So that statement really like rang deep in my body because I'm thinking to myself, well, shit, like he and I are going to be married for, the long haul. I'm going to have days where I'm going to feel sick or feel like shit. I don't know if I can do that, right? I really started to worry a little bit that this difference in culture, right, was going to affect the health of my marriage. And my husband, of course, I finally shared this with him. I internalized it for a long time before I actually shared it with him. And he looked at me and he laughed and he goes, honey, he goes, I see what you look like when you wake up in the morning. He's like, I'm not worried about it. You are you, regardless of whether you have makeup on or all of those things. Isn't he amazing? But like he laughed at that and it took this huge weight off my shoulders. Okay. So I share all of that because several things became very clear to me that I had internalized and I had built my level of self-worth and my understanding of self-worth around looking perfect, being perfect, never showing weakness, and working so hard that I was willing to sacrifice my health for the expense of the things that I already named, looking perfect, being perfect, and showing up as perfection. And that was a really hard pill for me to swallow because then I was like, well, shit, what am I going to do with that? How am I going to change that? And it took me getting comfortable with the messy. And really, it started with the unbridled joy of my 18-month-old child who used to run around in the living room and she would tuck her fish. She had a stuffed fish she called Fee for a long time. And she had a bear and, picture 18-month-old, not quite enunciating, right? So she would tuck Fee into the corner of the armchair. She would tuck Bear into the corner of the armchair. She would tuck her doll into the little bassinet in the living room. She would kiss them all before she went away, right? But she was leaving things out in the living room. When I started shifting my perspective, I started realizing that I was watching my daughter model how she saw me. And that, yes, there were toys in the living room, and that part stressed me out, right? Because I had blankets tucked in corners and I had stuffed animals that were out and, all this type of stuff, right? So, like, I was looking at it as my living room is a mess because that's what that little asshole inner critic in my head was saying, Adrienne, your living room is a mess. Go take care of it. You can't leave it like that. That's not right. And I'm using air quotes when I say right. Okay. Because I had created a definition of what was quote unquote right. That actually was an unhealthy expectation of being a human with a lived experience. But I didn't know that at the time. And holding myself in this unhealthy place was some of the years that I had the most disharmony, dysfunction in my body, health-wise, of my entire life. Okay, so I want to make that parallel for you also. In this moment, and I have a video of it because I remember very vividly that switch flipping in my head as I watched my 18-month-old run around in the living room before we went to daycare, okay? Because here I am standing with myself all dressed up. I'm ready to go, dress shoes, purse on, diaper bag in my hand, going, come on, kid. I'm going to be late for work. You're not done yet. My living room's a disaster. I'm going to have to clean this up when I get back, right? These are all the things that are going through my brain at that moment. All normal mom things, right? Any of you listening who are moms, does this land with you? I used to feel that way a lot. And then all of a sudden in that moment, that switch flipped for me. And I realized that she had a big smile on her face. And she was very proud of the fact that she was doing this loving gesture to her stuffed animals. And she was emulating exactly what I would do with her when I would tuck her into bed at night and I would read her a book and I would sing a song and all of that kind of stuff. And it totally opened my eyes to the fact that she doesn't care what this living room looks like. I'm the only one that cares. Why do I care? Because I've had years telling me that I need to fucking care instead of prioritizing what's in front of me. That this little miracle human being makes my heart sing, and she's showing me the love that she feels, receives, and experiences, and she's modeling this right in front of me. And that moment changed so much for me. I started being like, if there's dishes in the sink, I'm not going to browbeat myself about it. Am I going to have bugs by morning? Then I'm going to address it now. If this is something that is dry and it's a glass that I haven't washed and I can wash it in the morning, you know what? I'm just going to go snuggle my kid. I started to make decisions differently. I started to prioritize things differently. Now, she's almost 13 years old now. So that was the beginning of a really big shift that took place for me. And as I went along, I started realizing that my inner critic in my head was really loud. She was an asshole. And she used to tell me some really nasty things. We all have this inner critic that lives in our head. And that inner critic will tell us we're not enough. That inner critic will tell us we're not doing enough. They will make us feel shame and guilt over a perceived shortcoming. And that's exactly what it is. It's perceived. It's perceived because it is a construct of the stories we've been told throughout our life. And as women, we feel a lot of these super deeply. We have the ability to completely change our health picture when we start acknowledging the lies our ego self tells us. Because let's think about this. Somebody on the internet, a troll on the internet, could say something to you, and will it make you feel like shit and stew for a bit? Yes. Why? Because it was unkind. Because we have enough keyboard warriors out there now that feel yucky enough about themselves that they're willing to make themselves build themselves up to feel better by saying hateful shit to other people, which is a horrible place to be. But they wouldn't really have the balls to say a lot of that stuff to somebody's face because you see how those words affect other people. So words have become a super nasty, hostile place simply because there isn't that interpersonal feedback from keyboard warriors, but people still internalize this stuff and feel awful about it, right? So our inner critic gets shaped by, right? But if somebody says something online or somebody says something in a social setting and it makes you feel bad, it's temporary because you hear that thing once. I mean, yes, it might affect how you feel about yourself, but that moment is isolated. Whereas your inner critic is with you all the time. It is the voice you hear the most. It's the voice you hear the loudest. It's the one that feeds you the most bullshit. So it's the one we really have to take time to work with. And this could be something like standing in front of the mirror and doing affirmations. I found like that was a very potent thing for me. So right around this whole my daughter tucking her animals into the chair situation, okay, right around that time, I started doing affirmations in the morning in the mirror because not only was I struggling with these feelings of self-worth, but I also was still kind of dealing with some body dysmorphia after having had my daughter. There were a bunch of reasons that fed into that, but I really struggled with body dysmorphia for a while after I had my daughter. And I would stand in front of the mirror in the morning, full length mirror, so I could see my whole body, which was horribly traumatic for the first few times I did this. But I would say to myself, you are worthy. You are loved. You are beautiful just the way you are. Man, I couldn't get those words out of my mouth. I would sob through the whole thing because it brought me face to face with how deeply I did not believe those things. Because my inner critic had made me feel the opposite. And I needed to spend time rewiring the stories that I told myself. And it took a while. This is not something that happens overnight. This is not something that is going to happen in 6 months. This is a process. But this is a really critical part of the healing journey. Because when we don't do this kind of work, when we don't sit in our shit, when we don't face to face, like I was eyeballs to looking at my eyeballs in the mirror, saying, you are beautiful. You are enough. You are perfect just the way you are. I can say those statements now, but it took me over a year of doing this every fucking morning. I had a period of time where I dreaded doing this, but I held myself to it because I kept saying, I am not going to change how I feel if I am not consistent. And I'm so grateful that I did not eject when it felt uncomfortable like that, because man, I wanted to. I wanted to give up on the whole thing. I wanted to bail on it, say, this is bullshit. I am done. I am out. This sucks. This feels gross every single morning that I do this. And I started my day with it every single day. I look at myself eyeball to eyeball in the mirror and go, you are worthy. And I would instantly burst into tears. Well, then it got a little bit better. It wasn't instant tears. It was only certain phrases, because I had 7 phrases that I had written out that I would say to myself. And like maybe 2 and 7 would make me cry, but the rest of them wouldn't, right? So this was really important. So fast forward a few years, my middle child was, I don't know, maybe 8 at the time. And somebody had said something nasty to her at school. Now, my middle child has always moved to her own drummer. She's always had a very clear sense of who she is and her style. And she's always had pizzazz. Like, we would go to parent teacher conferences and people would be like, I just totally admire the fact that this child totally has a sense of style and a sense of who she is. And somebody had said to her, because she's a little more of an androgynous, where like sometimes she'll dress a little more feminine. Most of the time she dresses a little more masculine. We've always kind of let her just be who she is and embrace her fluidity as she's figuring out and navigating who she is in the world. As a teenager now, I feel like she has a much better sense of her gender performance. But at the time, I really wasn't sure where she was going to land. And we just kind of honored and celebrated who she was. And as long as she felt good about who she was, that was what mattered, right? Well, some child said something about her looking like a boy at school and made it sound very negative and derogatory. And she came home and was angry. She wouldn't talk about what happened at school, but she was like destructive angry. And I'm like, well, clearly something happened. Well, once we had a snack and we decompressed from school for a little bit, it all came out that somebody had said this to her. And it really hurt who she was and how she felt about herself. And I took her hand and I took her into my bathroom in front of that mirror that I had already been doing several years of work in front of. At this particular juncture, I had spent several years being very diligent with my morning affirmations, and I felt very differently about myself. And I stood her in front of the mirror and I had her essentially repeat after me. And I said the same phrases that I said to myself, and they made her cry. This is how deep this shit goes, people. Even young girls are internalizing this idea of self-worth, and they're telling themselves things based on what other people or other situations or other circumstances are influencing. And yes, we have toxic masculinity in our culture. Men suffer with a lot of similar types of things, but it hits women more deeply because we've been dealing with it for a long time. And it has affected our suppression of voice. It affects how we feel. It has shaped our cultural expectations of what it means to be female and how we communicate that to the world and how we share that intergenerationally in terms of what you're supposed to be as a woman. And I just think about the constant motion modeled to me by all of the women in my family. This is what was modeled to them. Right? Like, I'm not demonizing this. It's nobody's fault. It's the fact that we have just passed these ideas down generation to generation. And this is what we have been taught is socially acceptable. Right? But some of these stories are super unhealthy and they manifest themselves in health ways. So as I did this work in front of this mirror, right, and I started changing the conversation that was happening inside my head, my ideas of self-worth, my idea of what makes me valuable, and why did that change from what I knew in my heart to be true? I started seeing my cycle improve. I started having fewer headaches. That inner critic is so damn powerful. It will literally alter the way that your body shows up in the world from a health perspective. This is something that, find a therapist to work through it with, find an energy worker, do something like pelvic steaming where you end up releasing and unlocking emotions and feelings and senses of self-worth that you've locked away. Because when you're able to move these big energies in your system, you get healthier. You're able to more effectively express who you are. You come back home to your essence self. Think about when you're a child and those moments that you felt alive and the world felt magical and you felt pretty when you dressed up and you felt powerful and you could be whatever you conceived of in your imagination. And then the moment that somebody made a comment about how you moved through the world, what you looked like, all of that type of stuff, and how that changed the conversation inside of your body. Many of us can point back to moments where we remember when that shift took place because it's such a pronounced difference. This is just like the woman in my 20s that literally shaped the energy that I moved through the world with by making the comment, you think, you believe, you never feel. If you want to be a woman that succeeds in business, you think, you believe, you never feel. That changed my world for over a decade. I pulled that so deep inside myself because I already had this very fragile sense of self-worth. Maybe fragile isn't even the right word. Maybe it was more like I was saturated in a familial structure where my sense of self-worth was directly tied to how hard I worked, how well I worked. I think that's actually a lot more accurate now that I say that out loud. My sense of self-worth was so directly tied to work, how hard I worked, how much I produced, right? And this woman's comment about thinking and believing and knowing in order to be successful was intricately woven into that idea. It changed the way I dress. It changed the way that I spoke. I no longer felt anything. I thought, I believed, I knew things. It came out in my writing. as a copywriter and a speechwriter at the time. It came out in the way that I put outfits together. When my husband and I first got together, he said he saw a dramatic shift in my wardrobe because when we initially moved in together and I hung my clothes in the closet, the only colors were navy blue, black, gray, brown. There were no other colors in there. And once in a while, I would allow myself a shirt that had a pattern. So maybe it was a black shirt, but it had a pattern on it to bring a little bit of color into my outfit. But I had been so deeply saturated in this idea that I had to look a certain way to be successful. I had to act a certain way. I had to work a certain way in order to be successful, that my clothes reflected this masculine idea of success. And I literally was dressing like a dude. And I was dressing without colors that would make me stand out. If you look in my closet now, I have to dig to find things that are black, brown, gray. Like, I have so much color in my wardrobe. I mean, of course, I'm recording this and I'm wearing a gray shirt today, go figure. But I mean, if you look at my website, if you look at like clothing that I normally wear when you see me record things for reels or whatever, like I'm usually wearing color. My wardrobe is very brightly colorful. And honestly, the color makes me happy. It brings me joy. And I started seeing more color creep into my wardrobe as I started doing this mirror work. Because I started realizing I was dulling my shine and I was doing things that weren't feeling aligned in my heart and they weren't true to the essence of who I was. And as I started to give less of a shit about what other people thought, and I started doing things that were in alignment with what made me feel good and feel happy, and didn't set off my little intuition bells saying, no, Houston, we have a problem. Don't do this, right? Like, you ignore your body's wisdom when you listen to that ego mind and that inner critic that feeds you a bunch of garbage. As I stopped listening to that voice in my head and I started changing the way that voice talked to me, I saw a huge shift in what I attracted into my life. I met the love of my life and I married the love of my life. We grew a family together. We've gone from ruins to stable family structure, right? Like, we rebuilt our whole life together. And none of that would have been possible if I had allowed my inner critic to keep telling me the garbage that it was telling me. I never would have gone into practice and worked for myself if I had listened to the garbage that that inner critic used to tell me. So our mental health and our relationship with what we tell ourselves inside our head is critically important. It is important not only from a mental health space, but it is important in terms of how our bodies physically show up health-wise. I've seen people internalize certain negative things who have fibroids manifest. Digestive issues come from stuff like that. Like, the more we internalize and we try to stuff who we are, our essence self, down away from the light of day, and we listen to the unhealthy stories that our inner critic continues to tell us, we make ourselves sicker. Our health suffers. Our periods are one of the first place things suffer. Our fertility suffers. Everything suffers when we don't have the courage to be our authentic, vulnerable selves. And it's taken me a long time and a lot of work to get to the point where I'm like, the people who are meant to find me will love and receive me and find me exactly as I am. I don't have to change who I am, how I work, what I do for anyone. Now, do I still struggle with the guilt of sitting down and watching TV when I have laundry to do and a house to clean and I can see the dust kitties underneath the TV? Like, yes, I still struggle with that stuff, but I'm able to have a different conversation than I used to have, which has dramatically affected my health picture. I used to chastise myself. Oh, look at that. You missed the stuff underneath the TV. Why are you sitting? There's still work to be done. Get your lazy ass up and go do the laundry, right? That used to be the conversation that would happen inside my head. How many of you resonate with that? We tell ourselves some really fucked up shit. Now I have the conversation that sounds a little more like this. Oh, look, there are dust bunnies underneath the TV. Well, I haven't stopped moving yet today. So I'm going to take a few minutes. I'm going to let my body kind of come to a resting state, and I'll get up in a few minutes and go take care of it. See how that's different? I'm still getting stuff done, but I'm not browbeating myself. I'm not scolding myself. I am not shaming myself. I am not guilt tripping myself for the fact that that thing hasn't been done. I remember having a conversation with my husband. I think we had been married a year, maybe 2 at this time. And I said to him, I'm like, I'm tired of stressing myself out about the fact that the house doesn't look perfect all the time. I'm tired. I can't. And if the expectation is that it needs to look that way, then I'm going to need some help. That was such a hard conversation for me to have. And you know what? He goes, okay, we'll do it together. Why? Because he's the love of my life and he's amazing. But like, that was a really hard thing for me to acknowledge, to name, to recognize, because it meant I wasn't a superhero. And I've always desperately wanted to be a superhero. Anybody who knows me knows that I have a huge affinity for Marvel Comics, and I have always wanted to be a superhero. Now, granted, I know Wonder Woman is DC for those of you who are listening, but I do have a pair of Converse who have Wonder Woman on them. And I've always aspired to be a superhero. So the idea that there was a chink in my armor and I just couldn't do it years prior would have literally been the depths of despair for me. I would have guilt tripped myself. My anxiety would have been through the roof. I would have like talked a lot of shit in my head about the fact that I wasn't up to snuff. And in that moment, I looked at my husband and was like, if we're going to meet this expectation, I'm going to need help and I can't do it alone. And being able to admit that was really weird for me. It was uncomfortable. I also could feel in my gut that it was the truth. And I was speaking my truth. And I wasn't listening to that ego self and the talking head inside of my head that used to tell me all kinds of nasty things about myself. My body was saying, yes, girl, speak your truth. And it was met so beautifully by my partner who goes, you're working full time. I'm working full time. We'll do the best we can. There is so much power in being able to speak your truth. It transforms your health, your relationship with yourself, your emotional body. You're no longer like, sure, I'm going to make all the cupcakes for school tomorrow, right? Like the inner critic would say, well, you have to be the perfect mom. You need to do this thing, right? And then you spend the entire time that you're making the cupcakes cursing them out and resenting the fact that you're the one up until midnight doing the thing and nobody is there helping you. So there's resentment and anger there. How many of you does that land with? I've been there. And I didn't want to live there anymore because it didn't feel good. And the more I let that shit go, the healthier I got. My cycle improved. Headaches went away. My body digested food better. I had less trouble with bowel movements. Like, these are very real ways that suppressing emotions and subscribing to an unhealthy inner critic will manifest in the physical body. So I'm going to close this episode and invite you to sit in some of the messy spaces. And it's going to feel gross. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It's going to feel gross. And there are going to be moments where you're going to cry and you might even be angry at yourself because you've allowed yourself to believe certain things or say certain things or reinforce certain things or not hold boundaries around certain things. But that is where it begins. That is where the healing happens. You start there. And then you begin to do the work. Whether that's affirmations in front of a mirror in the morning, like it was for me, whether that is bringing a mental health professional into the picture. These things are very important in terms of your overall health. One of the most listened to episodes that you guys loved was Holistic Wellness is Not an Amazon Prime Kind of Fix. This is one of those moments where it is not a quick process, but it is a critical part of true holistic wellness. Being able to get back in touch with who you were when you were a kid and the world hadn't told you that you shouldn't be friends with this person or you have to look a certain way or you have to act a certain way. Just think about that time in your life when you felt free because you just were who you were. Nobody had colored or shaped or tainted that yet. The closer we get to coming back to that person, the happier and healthier and more well-adjusted and the better we're able to come into right relationship with our health and our calling in this life. So I invite you to sit into the messy spaces. Do not eject. Do not use means of escapism like technology to drown out how you're feeling or alcohol or anything like that. Sit with it and really ask yourself the hard questions. I love encouraging my clients to sit and journal when they're doing pelvic steaming because that's exactly what that does. You're stimulating an acupuncture point on your perineum that helps to move emotions. And whatever comes up for you, being able to express it, journal it, cry about it, be angry about it, whatever it is, it helps you to unlock it from this movie projector of your body so that it can move and it no longer dominates the conversation. You're able to heal, you're able to grow, and all of these things are a critical part of your health. So sit in the messy spaces. It may not be fun, but I promise you, the health outcome on the other side is totally worth it.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Reproductive Rebel. Reproductive Rebel is recorded by certified peri-steam hydrotherapist and acutonics practitioner, herbalist, and Chinese nutritional therapist, Adrienne Irizarry of Moon Essence LLC. If you are interested in setting up an appointment for one-on-one support, ordering from our store, or checking out our course offerings, visit our website at moonessence.life. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and get insider information on upcoming events and offerings. Join the conversation. Like and follow us at Moon Essence Me on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Your voices make this program possible. Thank you all for your continued support.